I think it's good we start with Surah al-Fatiha. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen, ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, maliki yawmiddin, iyaka na'budu wa iyaka nasta'een, ihdina as-sirat al-mustaqim, sirat alladhina anamta alayhim, ghayri al-maghdubi alayhim wa ad-dallin. Sadiq Allahu al-Ali al-Azim. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين ولعن الله على أعدائهم أجمعين من الأولين والآخرين آمين يا رب العالمين أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. So tonight we begin with a letter, but not the kind of letter any postal service could deliver. We begin with a letter from a man the world cannot see to a man the world would never forget. In the early years of the major occultation, when no deputy remained, when the door to the Imam had been closed, when the community might reasonably have wondered whether the hidden Imam knew they existed at all, a letter arrived. It arrived for a scholar in Baghdad, and it began with these words, and the references, of course, are always in the write-up. It began with the words, "The peace of God be upon you, O friend, the one sincere in faith and the one distinguished amongst us by his certainty." And in another letter, "The peace of God be upon you, O supporter of the truth, the one who calls to it with the word of truthfulness." So let us listen to what the Imam is saying. He's not writing to a king, he's not writing to a general, he's writing to a scholar. And the titles that he accords him are friend, sincere in faith, distinguished by certainty, and supporter of the truth. These are not titles any Khalif or Sultan or king could bestow. These are titles conferred from the unseen. Tonight, we meet the man who received them. But before we begin, a word about where we're going. Over the past 3 sessions, we've been covering a great deal of ground each week. Entire centuries, multiple scholars, vast historical arcs. The material ahead of us is too rich and too important to continue at that pace. Beginning tonight, we're going to slow down. Not because there's less to say, but because there is more to say. Each of the scholars we will meet in the coming weeks, the theologians, the founders, the martyrs, the jurists, the mystics, the revolutionaries, deserves to be known not merely as a name in a list, but as a human being. We want to walk with them, to understand the world they were born into, to see what they built, to stand at their graveside and say, what did this life mean, and what does it demand of us? The Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, his family and righteous companions, taught gradually, giving knowledge in portions the heart could absorb. We will attempt to follow his example. There is a wisdom the scholars of medicine have always known. When a person has been without food for a long time, you do not place a feast before them. You give them nourishment carefully, in measure, so that the body can receive it. Our community has been starved of this knowledge for a very long time. We will feed it, but with care. So tonight, one man, one life, one chapter in the story that we're telling. And that man's name is Shaykh al-Mufid. So in our previous session, we met the preservers. Shaykh al-Kulaini, the man from Kulain, who spent 20 years in Baghdad compiling al-Kafi, and who died the very year the door of the minor occultation closed. Shaykh al-Saduq, the child born of the Imam's own supplication, who traveled from Qom to Fargana and back to fight the crisis of doubt with the weapon of evidence. Together they gave us the first 2 of the 4 books. They saved the raw material of the tradition, the words of the Imams, gathered, verified and organized into works that have sustained the community for more than 1,000 years. But here's the question that their achievement raised, a question they could not answer because it was not their question to answer. What do you do once once it is saved? The hadith were compiled, the texts were preserved, the narrations were organized. But the Shia did not live in a vacuum. They lived in Baghdad, the most intellectually vibrant city on earth at the time. surrounded by brilliant minds who did not share their beliefs and who demanded reasons, not merely reports. You had the Mu'tazilites, the great rationalist theologians, who shared the Shia's commitment to divine justice, but rejected the Imamah. They could argue circles around anyone who only knew hadith. You had the Ash'arites, who would become the dominant theological school of Sunni Islam, who affirmed divine predestination and challenged the Shia understanding of God's justice and humanity's free will. And behind both stood the towering shadow of Greek philosophy, the legacy of Aristotle and Plato, which had entered the Islamic world through the great translation movement and had been powerfully reshaped by Muslim thinkers. For example, al-Farabi, known as the second teacher, second only to Aristotle himself, had already laid the philosophical groundwork a generation earlier. And Ibn Sina, commonly known in the West as Avicenna, who was born just 15 years after Shaykh al-Mufid, who would soon elevate Islamic philosophy to its highest peak. We will encounter both of these giants again as our series continues, but the Shia scholars we are tracing did not build in isolation. They built in conversation with the most powerful ideas of their age, and they were not afraid of that conversation. And behind all of these intellectual challenges stood a more immediate, a more dangerous question. If the Shia cannot defend their beliefs in the area of reason or the arena of reason, if they can only quote hadith while their opponents construct arguments, then how long before the educated youth of the community simply walk away? The preservers had saved the voice of the Imams. Now someone had to defend it. Someone had to take the preserved tradition and arm it with reason, to prove that what the Imams taught was not merely transmitted truth, but rather it was demonstrable truth. That someone was a young man from a small town on the Tigris, or the Tigris River, or Dijla, who arrived in Baghdad, walked into the classroom of the most formidable Mu'tazili judge in the city, and left that classroom with a new name. They called him al-Mufid, the beneficial one. In the previous session, we'll have a very brief recap. In the previous session, session 63, titled When the Light Was Hidden, we stood at the threshold of the major occultation. We heard the final Tawqiat of the hidden Imam, the letter that closed the door and delegated authority to the scholars. It said, as for the newly occurring events, refer regarding them to the narrators of our hadith, for they are my proof upon you, and I am the proof of God upon them. This is, of course, from the Imam. The references are in the write-up. We trace the work of Shaykh al-Kulaini, 20 years compiling al-Kafi in Baghdad, 16,000 narrations completed in the very year the occultation became total. We followed Shaykh al-Sadiq from Qom to Fergana and back, the scholar who found a community in doubt and answered that doubt with Kamal ad-Din and Man La Yahdhur al-Faqih, two books that we mentioned in the previous session. We explored the golden window opened by the Buyid Dynasty, the Daylamite mountain people who remembered the Alid refugees who had brought them Islam and who, when they came to power, gave the Shia their first era of intellectual freedom. We named the 4 books and the 6 books side by side, honoring the shared inheritance of preservation. And we established the critical principle that defines the Shi'i approach to hadith. No book is wholly sahih, or wholly authentic. Every narration must be tested, and the supreme standard against which it is tested is the Book of God. That session ended with the foundations laid. Tonight, we meet the man who built the walls. Please give me a salawat. We move to point 1, the formation from Ukbara to Baghdad.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajil.
So he was born in the year 336 after Hijrah, 7 years after the major occultation had begun, which was in 329 after Hijrah. 7 years into the silence in a town called Ukbara. Ukbara was a small settlement on the eastern bank of the Tigris River, sometimes called the Dijla in Arabic, about 60 kilometers north of Baghdad, in what is today the Saladin government of Iraq, the same province that contains the city of Samarra, where the 10th and 11th Imams were held under house arrest by the Abbasids, and where the 12th Imam entered his occultation. His full name was Muhammad ibn al-Nu'man, and his kunniyya was Abu Abdullah. Now, a kunniyya is a traditional Arabic honorific, a name of parentage, literally meaning father of or mother of, used as a mark of respect and dignity. In Arabic and Islamic culture, to address someone by their kunniyya rather than their given name is a sign of honor. You have, for example, Abu Abdullah, the father of Abdullah, was how his contemporaries would have addressed him in respect, much as we might say sir or use the formal title in English, though the kunniyya carries a warmer and more personal weight. And the people of his time knew him first by a much simpler title, Ibn al-Muallim, the son of the teacher, because his father was a teacher, a man who understood that the greatest inheritance he could give his son was not land or gold, but knowledge. And so his father did what the mother of Sayyid al-Murtada and Sayyid al-Radhi would do a generation later, a decision we will hear about in our next session. He brought his son to Baghdad, not to seek wealth, not to enter the courts of power, but rather to study. And what a city he entered. We described in our previous session the golden window that the Buyid dynasty had opened for the Shia, the sons of Dynamite mountain fishermen who remembered the Alid refugees who had brought them Islam and who, when they conquered Baghdad, gave the community something it had never had, freedom. By the time the young Ibn al-Muallim arrived in Baghdad, that freedom was at its peak. The Buyid grip on the city was secure. The patronage of learning was at its most generous, and the intellectual environment was unmatched anywhere in the world at the time. Though the dynasty's internal rivalries were beginning to show, the cracks that would ultimately, within decades, allow new conquerors to sweep it all away. The Al-Karkh quarter, which is the Shi'i neighborhood, was the intellectual heart of the city. More than 100 bookshops lined its streets. Scholars debated in courts, in mosques, in gardens, in the markets, and even in the bathhouses. The Buyid rulers patronized learning across sectarian lines, and the result was the most intellectually vibrant environment the Muslim world had ever seen. But it was also a furnace, because intellectual freedom does not mean intellectual comfort. It means that every idea must defend itself. The Mu'tazilites, brilliant rationalist theologians who affirmed divine justice but rejected the Imamah, held major positions in the courts and academies. Their arguments were sophisticated, their methods rigorous, their confidence immense. You also had the Ash'arites, the rising school of Sunni theology, championed by Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari and his followers. They were developing their own systematic defense of Sunni doctrine. This was the city the boy from Ukbara walked into. A city where you could publish freely, but where you would be challenged immediately. A city where being Shia was no longer punishable by death, but where being Shia without rational arguments meant being dismissed as intellectually provincial. A city that demanded not merely faith, but the defense of faith. Let's have a look at the day he earned his name. He studied under the leading Shia scholars of Baghdad and Qom, jurists and hadith specialists who carried the tradition of the Imams. And here's a detail worth noting. One of his principal teachers, a hadith scholar and jurist from Qom by the name of Ibn Qulaway al-Qummi, was a direct student of Shaykh al-Kulaini, the very compiler we met in our previous session. The chain is not abstract. Shaykh al-Kulaini compiled the words of the Imam. His student transmitted them. And that student's student, Shaykh al-Mufid, would defend them with the weapon of reason. 3 generations, 3 links, 1 unbroken chain. But Shaykh al-Mufid did not study only under Shi'i scholars. He also attended the classes of prominent Mu'tazili thinkers, because this was a tradition that did not fear other ideas. It engaged them. And it was in one of these classes that the moment came. The young Ibn al-Muallim was sitting in the circle of one of the most formidable Mu'tazili scholars of the age, the judge Abdul Jabbar, whose intellect commanded the respect of the entire city. During the lesson, the young student raised a point. The sources tell us that it was so sharp, so precisely argued, so unexpected from someone so young, that the judge was stunned. He asked the student's name, and then, in front of the entire class, he invited the young man to come and sit in his own place, the place of the teacher, and said, "You are truly mufid, truly beneficial." The scholars and students in the class were astonished. And in terms of what the actual point was, this is something we can discuss later on. It's inconsequential to our story at the moment. The judge turned to them and said, "We are at a loss to answer him. You try so that he goes back to his seat." And the reference for all of this is in the write-up. Now from that day, the young boy from Ukbara was no longer Ibn al-Muallim, the son of the teacher. He became al-Mufid, the beneficial one. And the name was not merely a compliment, it was a prophecy. Because this young man would spend the rest of his life being exactly that, beneficial to the community of Ahlulbayt. Now, news of what happened in that classroom reached the Buyid court, and the ruler, Adud al-Dawla, the most powerful of the Buyid monarchs, the man who had built the first shrine over the grave of Imam Ali in Najaf, recognized what the community had in this young scholar. He honored Shaykh al-Mufid with gifts, a horse with a golden saddle, a gown, a turban, 100 golden dinars, with each dinar being worth approximately 10 ordinary gold coins. And he ordered that the students who attended Shaykh al-Mufid's classes be provided with bread and meat every day, so that poverty would never be a barrier to learning. This was not mere royal patronage. It was the Buyid state saying to the Shi'a community, "Your scholars matter, your intellectual tradition matters, we will invest in it." And Shaykh al-Mufid, for his part, used that investment not to build personal wealth or political influence, but to build a school. A school that would produce the next generation of scholars, including two brothers whose story we will tell next week, and whose teacher was chosen for them in a dream by none other than Sayyedah Fatimah al-Zahra, peace and blessings be upon her. But that's for next week. Now let us pause over here, because this first point is about formation, and the formation of Shaykh al-Mufid carries lessons that are as alive today as they were 1,000 years ago. First, his father, a man whose name history barely records, al-Muallim, the teacher. Muhammad, of course, we know his name, but whose single decision changed the course of Shia intellectual history. He brought his son to Baghdad. He chose education over comfort, over safety, and over the familiar. He didn't keep his son in Ukbara, where life was quieter and the questions were smaller. How many parents today face the same choice? Whether to send a child to the Hawza, to a place of serious study, to a place where they become a human being, to an environment where they will be challenged and stretched, or to keep them close, where the questions are manageable and the answers are easy. The father of Shaykh al-Mufid chose the furnace, and that furnace made a diamond. Second, he studied under scholars who disagreed with him. The young Shaykh al-Mufid sat in the circles of Mu'tazili thinkers, men who rejected the Imamate, men whose theology differed from his on fundamental points. He did not avoid them. He did not declare them as enemies. He learnt their arguments so thoroughly that when the moment came, he could defeat those arguments from the inside. This is a lesson our community desperately needs today. We live in an age where many believers are afraid of ideas they disagree with, afraid that exposure to philosophy or Western thought or to the arguments of other schools will somehow weaken or tarnish their faith. Shaykh al-Mufid's example says the exact opposite. He sat in the Mu'tazili classroom, he listened, he understood, and then when the moment came, he stood up and made a point so sharp that the teacher himself could not answer it. You cannot defeat an argument you have not understood, and you cannot defend a faith you have only inherited but have never examined. The Buyid golden window gave the Shia freedom. Shaykh al-Mufid used that freedom not to build walls, but to enter the arena. And here's the contemporary reflection that presses on us. The Buyid window of intellectual freedom parallels the window Muslim communities have in the West today. Freedom to teach, to publish, to debate, to build institutions. The question Shaykh al-Mufid's era poses to us is, are we using our window the way Shaykh al-Mufid used his? 200 books in a lifetime without a printing press. We have the internet. What are we writing? Third, the window. We have said this before, and no doubt we will say it again because the pattern repeats. Every generation has a window. The Sadiqiyya window, the Buyid window, and the window that we're in right now. The window does not announce when it will close. It simply closes. And then the only question that matters is, what did you build while it was open? Please give me a salawat. We move to point 2, the contribution, the reason, the shield of reason, and the letters from the unseen. To understand what Shaykh al-Mufid did, we must first understand what existed before him. For the first century and a half of the occultation, the Shia scholarly tradition was primarily a tradition of what we call riwayah, narration. The scholars preserved what the Imams said. They transmitted it faithfully and organized it into collections. This was the work, as we said last session, of Shaykh al-Kulaini and Shaykh Sadiq, the preservers. And it was essential work. Without it, the words of the Imams would have been lost. But narration alone has a vulnerability. If your entire defense of your beliefs consists of saying, well, the Imam said so, then anyone who does not already accept the authority of the Imam will simply shrug and walk away. And in Buyid Baghdad, shrugging was the least of it. The Mu'tazilites did not merely shrug, they argued. They constructed elaborate rational proofs for their theological positions. They could demonstrate through formal logic why they believed what they believed about God's justice, about human free will, about the nature of the Quran. The Ash'arites also argued back with their own formal systems, their own theological architecture, their own answers to the same questions. And the Shia had hadith, magnificent hadith, profound hadith, hadith that contained within them the deepest truths of existence, but hadith that had not yet been translated into the language of rational argument. Shaykh al-Mufid understood that this was not merely an academic gap, it was an existential threat. If the educated youth of Baghdad, the young men and women who read philosophy, who attended the Mu'tazili debates, who breathed the air of rational inquiry, could not find rational arguments for their Shi'i beliefs, they would leave. Not because the beliefs were false, but because no one had shown them why the beliefs were true in the language that they understood. And so Shaykh al-Mufid did something that changed the trajectory of Shi'ism forever. He took the preserved tradition, the hadith of the Imams, the theology of Ahlulbayt, and he built around it a fortress of rational argument. He did not abandon the hadith, he armed them. He developed what the scholars call Kalam, systemic, rational theology, as a Shi'i discipline. Before him, Kalam was largely a Mu'tazili and Ash'ari enterprise. After him, the Shia had their own theological system, one that could stand in any debate, in any court, in any age, and defend itself. And alongside Kalam, he developed the Shi'i approach to Usul al-Fiqh, the principles of jurisprudence, the formal methodology by which the scholars derive legal rulings from the base foundational sources. Before Shaykh al-Mufid, Shi'i jurists relied almost entirely on direct hadith application. Shaykh al-Mufid introduced a structured method, a logical framework for moving from the general to the specific, from the principle to the ruling, and from the text to the application of that text. He did not see a contradiction between reason and revelation. He saw them rather as two wings of the same bird, and the bird could not fly with only one. His written output was staggering. The biographical sources record that he wrote approximately 200 works across theology, jurisprudence, history, ethics, Quranic sciences, and more. And among the most significant, we have three. The first, Principles of Discourse, Awail al-Maqalat, a theological work setting out the distinctive positions of the Shi'i school, clarifying where the Shi'i agree with other Islamic schools and where they differ, and why they differ. Second, you have the very well-known Kitab al-Irshad, the Book of Guidance, a comprehensive history of the 12 Imams, their lives, their miracles, and their stations, a work that remains to this day a primary reference. And you have al-Muqni'ah, the Sufficient Guide, possibly his most important jurisprudential work, a manual of Shi'i law that begins, and this is characteristic of the man, not with legal rulings, but with matters of belief. Because for Shaykh al-Mufid, law without theology was a body without a soul. 200 works. Think about this, in an age without printing presses, without computers, without reliable supplies of paper even, where every copy had to be written by hand and every book was both a physical act of endurance as well as an intellectual one. This was not a man who theorized about defending the faith. He actually did it, one book at a time, one debate at a time, one student at a time. And his students would include the greatest scholars of the next generation, as we will see momentarily. So what we've described so far, the intellectual revolution, the 200 books, the transformation of Shi'i theology, would be enough to secure Shaykh al-Mufid's place in history. But there is something else. Something that lifts his story from the realm of intellectual biography into the realm of the sacred. During the major occultation, when no special deputy existed, when the door to the Imam had been closed by the final Tawqiat, Tawqiat being the letter from the Imam, we heard in our last session, Shaykh al-Mufid received letters from the hidden Imam. Now we must pause here, because the weight of this statement deserves to be felt. The final Tawqiat of the Imam, delivered through the fourth deputy in 329 years after Hijrah, 7 years before Shaykh al-Mufid was actually born, had explicitly warned the following. The complete occultation has now occurred. There shall be no appearance except by the permission of God, exalted be his mention, and that shall be after a lengthy period and the hardening of hearts, and the earth being filled with injustice. And there shall come to my Shia those who claim to have seen me. Behold, whoever claims to have seen me before the rising of the Sufyani and the heavenly cry, such is a liar and a fabricator, and there is no power and no strength except through God, the Most High and the Most Great. The reference is in the write-up. The door of special deputyship was closed. No one could claim to be a representative in the way the 4 deputies had previously. And yet, letters came to Shaykh al-Mufid, not through any formal deputyship, not through a public claim of representation, through means that the sources describe without fully explaining, because the Imam's affairs and occultation are, by their nature, beyond our full comprehension, though we will discuss it at a later stage. What the traditions record is the content of these letters, and the content is quite extraordinary. We had 2 of them in tonight's preamble right at the beginning. The peace of God be upon you, O friend, O one sincere in faith, the one distinguished amongst us by his certainty, and the peace of God be upon you, O supporter of truth, the one who calls to it with the word of truthfulness. References again are in the write-up. Some scholars of the tradition have recorded that over the course of Shaykh al-Mufid's 30 years of scholarly leadership, he may have received as many as 30 such communications. The Imam addressed him as dear committed brother, a phrase that tells you everything about the relationship between the hidden Imam and the scholars who carry his authority. But it is not the words of praise that are most significant. It is the correction. There is an account recorded in the biographical sources that illustrates the nature of this relationship more powerfully than any theological argument could. A man came to Shaykh al-Mufid, and the reference for all of this is in the write-up. A man came to Shaykh al-Mufid from a nearby village with a question. A woman in their community had unfortunately died during childbirth. What should be done? Shaykh al-Mufid issued his ruling: bury the mother with her child, as in the child still in the womb. The man thanked him and left. But on his way back to the village, something happened. A man he did not know called out to him on the road and said, "The Shaykh has sent me with a correction. The child is still alive inside the mother. The womb must be opened, the child extracted, and only then should the burial proceed." The villager, believing the message had come from Shaykh al-Mufid, followed the instructions. The child was alive. The child was saved. Years later, the man and the child, now grown, returned to Baghdad to thank Shaykh al-Mufid for sending the corrected message that had saved this child's life. And Shaykh al-Mufid realized he had never sent any message. He had never sent any messenger. He did not know who the man on the road was. The messenger had come from the Imam. The realization struck him like a blow. He, the greatest scholar of his age, the man who had written 200 books, had issued a ruling that was wrong. And the Imam himself had intervened to correct it. Shaykh al-Mufid went home. He closed his door. And he seriously considered never issuing a ruling, a fatwa again. Think about what that means. A scholar of his stature, a man whose entire life was dedicated to providing guidance, was so shaken by a single error that he was prepared to stop entirely. This is not the behavior of a man motivated by ego or status. This is the behavior of a man who understood the gravity of what it means to speak on behalf of the religion of God. And then another communication from the Imam came. Continue issuing fatwas. We will support you. The references, like I say, are all in the write-up. The Imam corrected him and then told him to carry on. This is the relationship between the hidden Imam and the Marjaiyyah. The scholars are not infallible. The Imam never said they were. He said they are his proof, his representatives, and he watches over them. He corrects when correction is needed, and he encourages when encouragement is needed. The Marjaiyyah is not a human invention. It is not some accident of history. It is a divinely supervised institution, guided from the unseen by the Imam whose authority it carries. And the Tawqiat, the letters to Shaykh al-Mufid, are the proof. Now there's one more account from the life of Shaykh al-Mufid that we must hear tonight, because it connects this session to our next. The sources record that Shaykh al-Mufid saw in a dream the Lady of Light, Sayyedah Fatimah al-Zahra, peace and blessings be upon her. She came to him holding the hands of two young boys, Imam al-Hassan and Imam al-Hussein, peace and blessings be upon them both. And she said, "O Shaykh, teach them jurisprudence. Teach them fiqh." The references in the write-up. Shaykh al-Mufid awoke, shaken by what he has seen. That morning he went to the mosque in the Karh quarter of Baghdad, the Shi'a neighborhood we described earlier. And there, waiting for him, was a woman, accompanied by her servants, holding the hands of two young sons. And she said, "O Shaykh, teach them jurisprudence." The two boys were Sayyid Murtada and Sayyid al-Radhi, sometimes known as Sharif Murtada and Sharif al-Radhi. Ali and Muhammad, the sons of al-Hussein, descendants of Imam al-Kadhim, peace and blessings be upon him. The dream was actualized. The mother had brought her sons to Shaykh al-Mufid, and Sayyedah Fatimah al-Zahra had already instructed him to receive them. These two brothers would become giants. Sharif al-Radhi or Sayyid al-Radhi would compile Nahj Balagha, the sermons, letters and sayings of Imam Ali, peace and blessings be upon him, one of the most influential texts in the Arabic language and within the Islamic corpus. Sharif Murtada or Sayyid Murtada would become the undisputed leader of the Shia for 23 years after Shaykh al-Mufid's death. That is the subject of our next session, God willing. But the session tonight is this. The teacher-student relationship in the Hawza is not a bureaucratic arrangement. It is not a matter of applications and admissions and enrollment forms. It is sacred. Sayyedah Fatimah al-Zahra herself the daughter of the Prophet, the mother of the Imams, appeared in a dream to designate who should teach and who should be taught. The Hawza is not merely an educational institution. It is an institution whose appointments are sometimes made in the unseen. And there is one more dimension of Shaykh al-Mufid's contribution that we must name, because it connects directly to the thread that runs through this entire series. In his jurisprudential work, his most important legal text, Shaykh al-Mufid did something that went beyond his predecessors. He argued that the Imams themselves had delegated specific executive responsibilities to the qualified Shi'i jurists, what we call the fuqaha. The jurists, he wrote, have been granted authority by the Imams to lead prayer, not just the daily prayer, but congregational prayers like the Friday prayer and the prayer of the Eids. They have been granted authority to judge in disputes and to reconcile parties. They have been granted authority to collect and distribute the religious dues, things like the khums, the zakat, kafara, sadaqah, etc., and to ensure that these reach those who genuinely deserve them. In other words, the jurist is not merely a man who answers questions. The jurist is a man who governs, who administers the affairs of the community in the absence of the Imam. The biographical sources record Shaykh al-Mufid's position very clearly in his own words. He stated that the Imams have delegated these matters to the jurists of their Shia. The reference is in the write-up. Can you hear what's happening in that statement? The preservers, Shaykh al-Kulayni and al-Sadiq, compiled the hadith. Shaykh al-Mufid then said, the hadith are not merely to be stored, they require interpretation. And the men who interpret them, the qualified jurists, are not merely scholars, they are delegated authorities. They carry a portion of the Imam's responsibility. This is a direct step on the road to the Marjaiyyah, the system of scholarly authority that would develop over the coming centuries. And it is a direct step on the road to Wilayat al-Faqih, the principle that the most qualified jurist can govern not merely individuals, but a government, a system, a state. Shaheed Awwal, the first martyr, who we'll meet in a few sessions' time, will take this principle further, expanding the jurist's executive role even more explicitly. And Imam Khomeini, may God rest his pure soul, who we will also discuss further in the series, would take it to its logical conclusion. But the seed was planted here by a man from Ukbara, who sat in a Mu'tazili classroom, earned a name, received letters from the unseen, and wrote 200 books to prove that the faith of Ahlulbayt could hold its own in any era. Please give me a salawat and we move to point 3, the departure and legacy, the funeral of 80,000. So before we speak about how Shaykh al-Mufid left this world, we must speak of how he lived in it. Because this series is not merely about what these scholars wrote, it's about what they were. And the sources are unanimous. Shaykh al-Mufid was not only the most formidable intellect of his generation, he was among its most devoted worshippers. The scholars who knew him personally described a man who prayed through the night every night, who fasted frequently, who wore rough, simple clothing despite having access to the patronage of the most powerful dynasty of the Muslim world of the time, who gave constantly in charity, not from surplus but from substance. The Shafi'i historian Yafi'i, a man who disagreed with Shaykh al-Mufid on virtually every theological point, wrote of him, he would give charity very often and prayed a lot and practiced fasting frequently. He was a man of modesty and midnight prayer. He wore rough and coarse clothing. The reference is in the write-up. And another great Sunni scholar, Ibn al-Hajar al-Asqalani, one of the most respected hadith authorities in the entire Sunni tradition, went further, saying, he was a true worshipper and an ascetic. He was a man of midnight prayer. He was steadfast in acquiring knowledge. Shortly after the beginning of the night, he would wake up and begin prayer. He would then study and read the Quran. And the reference, like I say, is in the write-up. The same sources record that 80,000 people embraced Islam, embraced Shi'ism because of Shaykh al-Mufid. Not through compulsion, not through political pressure, but through the force of his arguments and the witness of his character. Think about that number. 80,000 people changed their beliefs, not because a king ordered them to do so, but because a man in rough clothes prayed all night, argued all day, gave away everything he had, and made more sense than anyone else in the room. This is the model of the Hawza at its best. Not scholars who impress from a distance, scholars whose proximity opens the heart. Because when you see a man who has mastered philosophy, who can defeat any opponent in debate, who has written 200 books, and then you discover that this same man sleeps on a rough mat, gives his money to the poor, and stands before God weeping in the last third of the night, something happens to you. The argument enters through the mind, but the character enters through the heart. And when both arrive together, the effect is permanent. This is the lesson that the Hawza has always understood, that our modern age, with its obsession with credentials and publications and online followings, is in danger of forgetting. Knowledge without piety is a lamp without oil. May look like a lamp, may sit where the lamp should, but it gives no light. Shaykh al-Mufid gave light because the oil of his worship fed the flame of his knowledge. And now we come to the 3rd of Ramadan, 413 years after Hijrah. Shaykh al-Mufid died on this day, the 3rd of the holy month of Ramadan, in the year 413 after Hijrah, which is approximately 1022 of the Common Era. He had lived for 77 years. 77 years of teaching, debating, writing, worshipping and building. And Baghdad mourned him as it had mourned few men before him. The great Sunni historian Ibn Kathir, a scholar of the Hanbali school, who was no friend to Shi'ism in terms of its theological positions, counted the death of Shaykh al-Mufid among the most significant events of the year 413. In Ibn Kathir's own words, he said, "The great Shaykh and Shi'i scholar passed away in that year. He was one of the major Shi'i authors and supporters of their seminaries. He had credit and influence among the kings of neighboring regions. Sharif al-Radhi and Sharif al-Murtada, who we mentioned earlier, were his students. They composed some couplets in his grief after he passed away." Again, the references are in the write-up. This was not a Shia hagiographer exaggerating. This was a Sunni historian acknowledging that a giant had fallen, and the funeral itself was something the city had rarely seen. According to the sources, they record that 80,000 plus people attended the funeral. 80,000 mourners in a city at the time that had a population of maybe 200,000-300,000. A significant portion of the entire capital came to a stop. Among the mourners were Sharif Murtada, Shaykh al-Mufid's greatest student, the man who had been brought to him as a boy by his mother, the man Sayyedah Fatimah al-Zahra had designated in a dream. Sharif Murtada led the funeral prayer, and he and his brother Sharif al-Radhi composed verses of grief for the teacher who had shaped them both. Think about what 80,000 mourners means. These were not people who had read his books. Most of them could not read. These were not fellow scholars who appreciated his methodology. They were ordinary people, shopkeepers, laborers, mothers and children, the people of Karkh and beyond, who understood in the way that ordinary people always understand, that this man had given his life for them. He had defended their beliefs when no one else could. He had given them intellectual dignity in a city that could easily have dismissed them. He had stood in the courts and the classrooms and the public squares and said, "The faith of Ahlulbayt is not a provincial superstition. It is a rational, defensible, demonstrable truth, and I will prove it to anyone, anywhere, in any language you choose." They came to his funeral because he had given them their voice. And then there's this. After Shaykh al-Mufid was buried, verses appeared attributed by the tradition to the hidden Imam himself that were inscribed upon his grave. They read, "Let no voice be raised announcing your death, for the day of your passing is immense upon the household of the Prophet. Though you are concealed beneath the soil, knowledge and the affirmation of God's oneness reside forever in you. and the arising Mahdi rejoices whenever your teachings are recited before him. The reference is in the write-up. Think about that last line. The arising Mahdi rejoices whenever your teachings are recited before him. The Imam, hidden from the world, watching from the unseen, rejoices when the work of this scholar is studied. This is not merely a tribute to one man. This is a statement about the entire scholarly tradition. The Imam is not indifferent to the Hawza. He is not distant from it. He rejoices in it. The work of every scholar who teaches, who writes, who preserves, who defends, that work reaches the Imam and it brings him joy. Now, if that doesn't give you goosebumps, check your pulse. Let us now stand back and see where Shaykh al-Mufid stands on the road we are tracing. Before Shaykh al-Mufid, the tradition had its content, the hadith of the Imams compiled by Shaykh al-Kulaini and Shaykh al-Sadiq. Shaykh al-Mufid gave the tradition its method, rational theology, systematic jurisprudence, and the formal defense of beliefs and language of reason. And he gave the tradition its students. This is perhaps his greatest legacy. Not the 200 books, not the debates, not even the Tawqiat, but the fact that when he died, the chain did not break. Sharif Murtada, known as al-Huda or the Banner of Guidance, took leadership of the Shia community for 23 years after Shaykh al-Mufid's death. He pushed the rational methodology further, insisting on critical evaluation of hadith against Quran, and led the community through the final decades of the Buyid era. Sharif al-Radhi, Sharif Murtada's brother, compiled Nahj Balagha, which, as we've said, is one of the most influential books both in the Arabic language and within the Islamic tradition, across all schools of thought. He gave the community the political manual of Imam Ali, peace and blessings be upon him, a text that would feed directly into the concept of just governance that leads centuries later to Wilayat al-Faqih. And through Sharif Murtada's students, above all Shaykh al-Tusi, whom we will meet in maybe 2 or 3 sessions, God willing, Shaykh al-Mufid's methodology would travel from Baghdad to Najaf, where it would be institutionalized in the Hawza that stands to this day. The chain runs like this. The Imams taught their companions. The companions recorded their words in the Usul, the 400 principles we mentioned previously. Shaykh al-Kulaini and Shaykh al-Sadiq compiled those words into the 4 books, or 2 of the 4 books. Shaykh al-Mufid armed those books with reason and trained the next generation to wield them. Sharif Murtada and Sharif al-Radhi refined the method and preserved the political philosophy. Shaykh Tusi would take it all to Najaf and build the permanent institution. Every link holds because the previous link held. Shaykh al-Mufid is the link between preservation and defense, between the raw material and the rational fortress built around it. Without him, the tradition would have had its texts, but not its arguments. It would have had its content, but not its method. It would have had its past, but not its future. And now let's look at some lessons that we can garner from this. 3 things we can carry from the ending of Shaykh al-Mufid's life. First, character outlasts argument. Shaykh al-Mufid won every debate. He wrote 200 books. He transformed Shi'a theology. But when 80,000 people came to his funeral, they were not mourning a debater. They were mourning a man who prayed all night and gave away everything that he had. The arguments opened the door, certainly. The character walked through it. In our age of social media scholars, online personalities, where intellectual performance is rewarded with followers and likes and so on, Shaykh al-Mufid's example is corrective. The question is not how many people watched or attended your lecture. The question is, did you pray last night? Did you give from your own plate? Would the people who live closest to you, your family, your neighbors, your students, your friends, would they testify that you're a servant of God, not a performer for an audience? Second, the chain must not break. Shaykh al-Mufid's most important act was that not any single book or any single debate. It was the training of Sharif al-Murtada and Sharif al-Radhi. the two brothers who would carry the tradition forward. Without them, everything Shaykh al-Mufid built would have died with him. In our communities today, in Leicester, in London, in Dearborn, in Sydney, in Melbourne, and wherever, we in Toronto, we have speakers, we have programs, and we have institutions. But the question is this: are we training the next generation to carry this forward? Or are we building around personalities who, when they leave, take everything away with them? The Hausa model is not personality dependent. It is chain dependent. The teacher trains the student becomes the teacher, the chain continues. And the chain is stronger than any individual link. Third, the Imam is watching. The verses on Shaykh al-Mufid's grave: the arising Mahdi rejoices whenever your teachings are recited before him, tells us something that should transform the way we understand our own work. Every class taught in a mosque basement, in a call, in a late night study circle, every parent who sits with their child and teaches them about Islam, about Ahlulbayt, about the Quran, every scholar who writes a book that 3 people read, every volunteer who organizes a program that no one thanks them for, the Imam sees it and it brings him joy. We may not receive a Tawqiat, a written communication. We may never hear his voice or read his words that are addressing us by name. But the relationship is real. He is not neglectful of our affairs. He is not forgetful of our remembrance. And he rejoices in our work, the same way as he rejoiced in the work of the man from Ukbara, who earned the name al-Mufid and spent 77 years proving that the name was entirely deserved. Please give me a salawat. We move to the conclusion.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل.
So tonight we have walked with one man, from Ukbara to Baghdad, from the student's bench to the most formidable intellectual pulpit in the Muslim world at the time. And from there to a grave inscribed with the words of the hidden Imam. Shaykh al-Mufid, Muhammad, the son of Muhammad, the son of al-Nu'man, was the man who took the preserved traditions of the Imams and armed them with reason. He transformed Shia theology from a tradition of narration into a tradition of rational defense. He wrote 200 books. He debated every school and defeated every challenger. He received letters from the Imam of the age, may our souls be his ransom. The Imam called him friend, and the Imam corrected him when he erred, and the Imam told him to continue. He saw Sayyedah Fatimah al-Zahra in a dream, and the next morning the 2 boys she had entrusted him walked through his door. He expanded the authority of the jurors, planting the seeds that would grow over the centuries into Marjaiyyah and ultimately into Wilayat al-Faqih. And when he died, 80,000 people came, not for his arguments, but for his character. Because he was a man who prayed through the night, gave away his wealth, wore rough clothes, and never once confused knowledge with arrogance. He was al-Mufid. He was the beneficial one. And 1,000 years later, we are still being benefited by him. Please give me a salawat, and we have a very short maqtal because yesterday was the martyrdom anniversary of Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
And before we close, we must pause, because God's calendar does not work by accident. Yesterday, as I said, marked the anniversary of the martyrdom of the man from whom all of this flows. Imam Ja'far ibn Muhammad al-Sadiq, peace and blessings be upon him. The 6th Imam, the teacher of 4,000, the founder of the school that gave the Shia and the Sunni world alike the foundations of their jurisprudence. We have spent multiple entire sessions with him, the latest being session 62. 2 sessions previously, standing in his classroom in Medina, watching the great scholarly circle in the history of Islam, the greatest scholarly circle in the history of Islam, pour out knowledge across every discipline. And we said then, everything that comes after is an attempt to preserve what he poured out. Tonight we have met one of those who preserved it, Shaykh al-Mufid, who armed the Imam's teachings with the weapons of reason. But the teacher himself, what happened to the teacher? The Abbas al-Khalif al-Mansur, the same al-Mansur who called Imam al-Sadiq a thorn in my side that neither sweetness nor severity can remove, could not remove the thorn by debate, by exile, or by imprisonment, so he removed it with poison. In the year 140 after Hijrah, in the holy city of Medina, Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq was poisoned at the orders of al-Mansur al-Abbasi. The sources describe the poison as being administered through grapes, offered as a gift, received as a betrayal. The Imam suffered, and then the Imam died. He was buried in the cemetery of al-Baqi, next to his father, Imam al-Baqir, and his grandfather, Imam Sajjad, Imam Zayn al-Abidin, and the Imam, Imam Hassan ibn Ali, peace and blessings be upon them all. That grave, those graves, would later be demolished. The Wahhabi destruction of al-Baqi in 1925 erased the physical markers, almost as if the enemies knew that even a grave bearing the name of as-Sadiq would become a university. But they could not demolish what he built in the hearts of his students. They could not demolish the 4,000. They could not demolish the Usul, the 400 principles his companions carried away. They could not demolish al-Kafi, with Shaykh al-Kulaini compiled from those principles. They could not demolish the fortress of reason that Shaykh al-Mufid built around them. They poisoned the teacher, but the lesson survived. And tonight, 1,000 years later, in a gathering that would not exist without him, we are the proof that the poison failed. The thorn is still in their side, and it will remain there until his grandson, the Mahdi, may our souls be his ransom, may God hasten his return, returns to finish what he started. Peace be upon you, O Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq, O Aba Abdullah. Peace be upon you, O son of the Messenger of God. Peace be upon you, O teacher of 4,000 and father of a civilization. Your students are still studying, your school is still open, and the man from Ukbara, the one they called al-Mufid, defended your legacy with every breath he had. May God gather them together, the teacher and the defender, in the company of your grandson on the day when the world is finally set aright. And finally, we have a short supplication eulogy, a prayer at the grave of a friend. O God, we stand tonight at the grave of a man who gave his life to defend the truth of your Ahlulbayt. A man who wore rough clothes and prayed through the night and wrote 200 books so that a community would not lose its voice. A man to whom your hidden proof wrote with his own hand, O friend, O supporter of the truth. We ask you, by the station of that friendship, raise the rank of Shaykh al-Mufid. Place him in the company of the Imams whose words he defended. Let the light of his scholarship be a witness for him on the day when all witnesses are called. And let the arising Mahdi, who rejoiced in his teachings, greet him as he greeted him in this world, as a brother, as a beloved, and as a friend. O God, the world tonight is drowning in oppression. The lands of the prophets are soaked in blood. The cries of the innocent rise from every corner of this earth, from Palestine to Lebanon, from Yemen to Sudan, from Iran to Iraq, from even in the West, from every place where the powerful crush the weak and call it order. And in this darkness we understand, as Shaykh al-Mufid understood, that the weapon against oppression is not only the sword, it is the pen, it is the classroom, it is the book written at midnight by a scholar who refuses to let ignorance win. Because ignorance in the soil ignorance is a soil in which oppression grows. And knowledge, true knowledge, rooted in your book and the teachings of the Prophet and your Ahlulbayt, is the hand that uproots it. Every child who is taught truth is a blow against tyranny. Every community that is educated is a fortress that cannot be taken. Every scholar who speaks when silence is easier is a soldier in the army of the Imam, whether the Imam has returned or not. O God, hasten the return of our master, the Imam of our time, the son of al-Hasan, your proof upon creation and your trustee over the servants. The earth is filled with injustice, as you promised it would be. We cannot end the injustice alone, but we can build the same way that Shaykh al-Mufid built. We can teach the same way Shaykh al-Mufid taught. We can arm the next generation with reason and faith and courage, so that when the Imam returns, he finds not a community asleep, but a community that has been preparing, building, striving, and refusing to surrender to the darkness. O God, make us links in the chain that Shaykh al-Mufid strengthened. Make our work a source of joy for the Imam. And when the day comes that the Mahdi rises, let him find that from the seeds Shaykh al-Mufid planted and the seeds we planted after him, They have become a garden worthy of his return. O God, grant us an ending that is pleasing to you. Let us live in this world as your true servants, following the path walked by the likes of Shaykh al-Mufid. And let us leave this world with that servanthood intact, and make us, in our living and our dying, from those who are a source of joy for you and for Muhammad and the family of Muhammad. O God, bless Muhammad and the family of Muhammad. Send your peace upon the proof, the hidden, the awaited, and the one for whom the scholars compiled, debated, and bled and died, and the one for whom we yearn and wait. And grant us the honor of standing in his service in this world and the next. Amen, O Lord, sustainer of the universes. Amen, O most merciful of the merciful. Wa akhiru da'wani an alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.